Oh, wow! Super!
Amazing!
Incredible!
Hey, I'm diving deep into my personal favorite classic-era Scooby series, the new Scooby-Doo Movies, across multiple videos to uncover what's so great. This series, the first follow-up to the original Where Are You series, had a special guest star every episode, but not all of them were real people. In fact, several of them were crossovers with other Hanna-Barbera series at the time, such as the now-forgotten Harlem Globetrotters series I already covered. Today, we're looking at the last 4 remaining crossovers with other Hanna-Barbera shows and what makes them so classic. 3 of these episodes were actually lost for a time when it came to public availability, namely home video, and one of them to this day has still never been released on disc at all, making it the last remaining lost episode, so to speak. But we're going to dive into what we're missing out on with it anyway today. Did you know Mark Hamill voiced a main character in one of these shows before any of his later Scooby roles? We're going to get into that as well and more, as we look at these iconic 4 episodes guest starring the Addams family, Josie and the Pussycats, Speed Buggy and his friends, and lastly, Jeannie. Yes, Jeannie from I Dream of Jeannie, but also not. It's complicated, we'll get there. Over this video, we'll cover the history of these characters and their shows, like with the Harlem Globetrotters, don't worry. And as mentioned, the animation in this show, due to the time restraints and double length, is as messy and off-model as it gets. And some of these episodes might be some of the most extreme examples. Let's kick it off and get into the most interesting, still lost episode first. So what do I mean when I call this the last remaining lost episode? As mentioned in the Cher and Sandy Duncan video, 8 episodes of the show, when it was released on DVD, were unable to be included due to Warner being unable to clear the rights to those guest appearances, also resulting in the opening theme being altered to remove most guests, even ones they had the rights to, weirdly. This meant that the DVD set was called The Best Of to account for 8 episodes not being included with it. In 2019, Warner was finally able to clear 7 of the 8 episodes, and with it being who knows how long before the last one would ever be cleared, it seemed enough to move forward with releasing the almost complete collection on Blu-ray, and a separate DVD to complement the Best Of DVD set titled The Lost Episodes of the Show. Cher, Sandy Duncan, Phyllis Diller, and more finally made their way to home video, including 2 episodes we'll get to in this video, but that's still only 7 of 8. What about the last one? Well, as I said, this first episode today still unfortunately remains the final lost episode of the show, sort of. Season 1, Episode 3 of the new Scooby-Doo Movies, Wednesday is Missing, aired originally September 23rd, 1972, and would continue in regular reruns. But when it came time to release the show on DVD specifically, Warner was unable to secure the rights from the T. and Charles Addams Foundation, or MGM, or whatever particular party was holding it up within the rights holders. This is especially unusual, as the series it's a technical crossover with, 1973's The Addams Family, was released on DVD in 2010, 9 years before the Blu-ray, so they were able to clear that, but not this particular episode. To this day, it's remained unreleased on home video. It's not entirely lost media though, and I don't just mean the TV rips floating around since I was a kid. Last year in September of 2024, Warner finally made the episode available to stream on their service with other episodes of the show, which suggests they finally cleared the rights at least somewhat. No surprise, as the current iteration of the original 1964 sitcom on DVD is distributed by Warner themselves, their logo all over the packaging. I wouldn't be shocked if they were able to clear this episode at last whenever that happened. So it's not really lost, but it's still lost in the way that the other 7 were categorized by Warner for the lost DVD set. Unfortunately, while the other 23 episodes were restored and spruced up using the original film elements for the 2019 Blu-ray, since this one wasn't included, the streaming version is still the same old, outdated master that's been stuck in reruns, so it looks pretty bad these days. The really crappy thing is, I'm having to add this after completing most of the video, because it's now been announced that pretty much all of Scooby, including this episode and show, has been removed from the streaming service as of uploading this video in June 2025, so the only way you could legally watch this episode is now gone. This episode is just not legally available anymore and is even more lost, so yeah. As for what this episode is actually a crossover with, of course, as mentioned, it's the 1973 animated Hanna-Barbera series, The Addams Family. However, this episode actually predates that show by exactly a year, making this sort of a backdoor pilot actually to see if the idea could work. This, of course, is all deriving from the 1964 sitcom The Addams Family, based on the works of Charles Addams.
The Addams Family.
It follows the kooky, spooky family made up of Gomez and Morticia Addams, their children Wednesday and Pugsley, Uncle Fester, Grandmama, Thing, their butler Lurch, and sometimes Cousin It. They're a wonderfully loving and happy family. They're just a little macabre, typically fully human supposedly, and yet off, how I strive to be. I rewatched the entire series not long ago, and while I actually found it more uninteresting as a child for some reason, I was more of a Munsters kid. It really holds up solid as an adult. It's something quite special. John Astin and Carolyn Jones as Gomez and Morticia in particular are iconic and beyond influential, and thankfully for this crossover episode, the both of them return to voice their characters here. Jackie Coogan and Ted Cassidy, who portrayed Uncle Fester and Lurch in the show, also returned to voice their iconic parts in this episode as well, and would return for the full series a year later. Astin and Jones were sadly not available for reprisal, however, in the 1973 series. Gomez would be voiced by Lenny Weinrib, who you might know best as the original voice of Scrappy-Doo.
I hated to take advantage of the poor chap that way, but business is business.
Morticia in the series was taken over by Janet Waldo, who I mention frequently on the channel, from voicing Judy Jetson to all kinds of iconic roles for Hanna-Barbera. She's even Josie of the Pussycats, who we'll be getting to in this very video.
Darling, you're such a shrewd negotiator.
Wednesday, before the hit Netflix series, and Pugsley did not see reprisals from the original sitcom, as Lisa Loring and Ken Weatherwax had already grown up too much by 1972. Instead, Cindy Henderson and Jodie Foster, yes, that Jodie Foster, at the age of 10, took over their voices for this Scooby episode and the following series.
Bat's eyes blind, cat's eyes glowing. Fill this moat to overflowing.
The Addams family remain iconic through many iterations to this day, from the 90s films that I grew up with the most, to even the recent animated films. And who can forget the Netflix Wednesday series currently running? Morticia and Wednesday even got Monster High Skeletor dolls in addition to the ones for the Netflix show in particular, Morticia here being to die for. I have them all. The Addams will always be relevant and part of pop culture, and I think having them cross over with the Dog Detective was a perfect idea, and a perfect pilot to test them out in animation. Let's look at the Lost episode itself.
Today, Scooby-Doo meets the Addams Family.
Out in who knows where, the gang find themselves lost in fog as they often do, only getting worse when they start hearing spooky sounds. When some headlights that look like eyes scare Scooby, he covers Fred's eyes and leads them into a crash. But of course they realize what those eyes were too late. A nice old couple trying to escape from the old house nearby. They were hired to be housekeepers. Fred asks what's so strange and a howl seems to answer as the couple speed off. Daphne feels like she recognizes this house, which starts our various clues that they watch the Addams Family sitcom on TV, which begs the question, is the show like reality TV in the Dooniverse? Unfortunately, Fred can't get the van unstuck.
But it's dark. We could be stranded here all night.
Thelma, you're always so negative. Why can't you be more positive?
All right. I'm positive we'll be stranded here all night.
Shaggy gets a fright from none other than Lurch, who leads them all back to the mansion. Everyone's starting to really feel like they've seen him and this home before.
Actually, thinking you've seen someplace before that you've never been in is quite a common psychological phenomenon. It's called déjà vu.
Inside, Morticia worries about Gomez, nervous himself that they'll have to cancel their vacation with the housekeeping gone.
I tell you, Carita, I'm so mad I could jump up and down shouting pleasant things.
Please, go away. It's not in front of Wednesday.
Wednesday gets a voodoo boo-boo, so they send her off.
Wednesday's growing up to be such a sweet, cheerful young lady.
Cheer up, Carita. Maybe we'll have better luck with Pugsley.
Wondering about Pugsley, they pull him out of the sandbox, trying to dig his way to China, and we get this moment of Casey Kasem, Shaggy's actor, voicing a very interestingly designed little Chinese boy.
Hi, Pugsley.
My parents said I couldn't play with you.
Okay, so long.
Ready to unpack at this point, they look for Lurch, who left to find new housekeepers, and it seems he found his targets. Finally inside, the gang connect the dots.
I've seen it on TV lots of times.
Are we on reality TV this very moment? The family introduces themselves, including Uncle Fester, a very weird-looking thing who is kind of green here, and even Cousin It is home. They find out all the creepy howls meanwhile were coming from Grandmama's record.
A record?
Oh, wow. Scario and stereo.
Grandmama finds it so restful before her daily ugly nap.
The jokes in this one are such bangers that it's just back to back. The Addams give the gang no time to object to looking after the house and kids while they take their vacation in the Okefenokee swamp, heading out and packing their things. As the night carries on, Fester declares himself head of the family, and between he, Lurch, and Grandmama being here, you have to wonder why they even needed housekeepers. Speaking of Lurch, the food he brings isn't too appealing, but even that doesn't give Shaggy pause, only Cleopatra stopping him. Suddenly, dinner is interrupted by flapping wings and a giant shadow that turns everything dark. Thang relights the candles, Wednesday is missing as the episode title suggests, and they find a letter signed by the Vulture warning the Addams to get out.
Don't you want to see Wednesday again?
And I want to live to see Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
The gang decide to split up to find the missing child in question, Daphne and Fred checking around the study, while the boys and Velma get a spook from some armor.
Is it still following us?
I don't know. I'm afraid to look.
Men.
They rest thinking they lost it until they look up, and inside, it's empty. Out in the swamp, Gomez and Morticia are none the wiser, relaxing and enjoying their lovely alone time together. Back in the Addams mansion, Fred and Daph are being chased by a magic carpet, which gives Fred an idea and they escape into a hall of doors. Oh, I'm sure he knows a lot about closets. And these guys are doing whatever they're doing in there.
I've heard of skeletons in the closet, but this is ridiculous.
They check a few more rooms just to be safe.
Wednesday? Is that you? That's not her either.
Everyone regroups out of ideas until they find another door, which, thanks to a Scooby fright, they're able to go through, and they have more hijinks in the empty bedroom of Gomez. I guess he and Morticia sleep separately? Everyone unsure of what to do. We get our second mention of a mummy from Shaggy, and not the last. However, a mummy does not appear in the episode, even this uncut full version. They at least find Wednesday's voodoo doll, so they have Scooby take a good sniff so he can track her. Maybe too good, as he does sneeze and accidentally reveal a note inside the doll. Another warning from the Vulture. Scoob gets a better whiff and starts his tracking, but of course his lead turns out to be for food. Grandmama shows up to divulge that his soup was actually the iguana's bathwater. Meanwhile, the frightened hound falls down to his doom, or what actually turns out to be some freaky elevator. So the gang take it up to the top, and it's kind of giving that Cage from Monsters Unleashed. They find a secret door, but it's locked, so Velma hacks it.
You're an absolute genius.
So what else is new?
And right inside, Wednesday awaits, not bothered at all. Her chair is somehow levitated here, only otherwise seeing the Vulture in the sky, and the gang finally see it too now that they're up there, aiming itself toward them. It drops an egg like a bombshell, which, okay, and inside is a final warning. The boys ride back down, but Gomez and Morticia arrive home before they can make it out the door, finding the boys passed out inside some dinosaur bones, and the gang catch the two up on what's going on. While the trio split up, the boys take a nap on the magic carpet, which proceeds to fly them out and through the sky. Worse, it seems the Vulture is somehow pulling the magic carpet toward it, as if tied together. The trio back inside accidentally start off some of Fester's explosives, which knock the boys out of the sky to safety, and also hit the Vulture, leading it to crash and reveal itself to be a helicopter manned by the older couple from before. They put a bunch of magnets in the house when they pretended to be housekeepers so they could control things, such as Wednesday's chair, and Daphne mentions the non-existent mummy again as some of their work. You have to wonder if the armor was originally written to be a mummy and got changed after they already recorded the voice work or something. Armor does make more sense to control than empty mummy wrap, to be fair. The motive of the old couple is that they believe the Addams and their spooky going-ons were having a negative effect on the neighborhood kids. Velma gets an idea, and they turn the dino bones and other spooky things into a playground for the children, changing the minds of the couple about the Addams. The family wants the gang to stay, but they feel it's time to go.
How triste.
Triste. Tish, you spoke French. Speak some more. Soup de jour. Eiffel Tower. Anything.
Darling, please. Triste now, tryst later.
Everyone says goodbye to them, even Thing, and yes, even Cleopatra. Lurch assists them in getting the van free, and they drive off. But it's too dark for Shaggy to see the map, so he sets off Fester's candles, which still do not have the desired effect, leaving them to drive off in chaos. And that's when Scooby-Doo met the Addams family in Wednesday is Missing. Many have said this just might be the best episode of this particular series, and I wouldn't argue it, especially if you love the Addams family, no matter what iteration, but especially the sitcom that finished about 6 years prior. This episode really feels right at home with that specific humor that made those characters work so well. Having the original actors when possible also really makes it feel like these are truly these characters rather than trying to imitate. I love that they did attempt to make that happen here and treated them with respect, rather than being seen as replaceable when still available. The gang have to accept that things here are just spooky and kooky, and that's how it goes for once, which adds some new flavor, although the Addams don't have the largest focus. One might find that to be a good thing, of course, that it's Scooby's show and the gang should still be center stage. age, and simply dropping them into the home gives them plenty of interesting new things to do and see. It almost feels like a proto-reluctant werewolf era kind of situation. I love how much humor Velma in particular has. She really feels like a standout comic character, and some of my favorite moments are when she gets to have those in any episode. The mummy and/or armor situation is interesting. You don't often see that kind of huge continuity issue. The animation, also as expected, is often kind of wonky, and I love that. It really is a shame that perhaps the best episode this show has to offer is the most gatekept episode as well. Home video still seems like it will always remain elusive, and so technically it will continue to somewhat remain the last remaining lost episode, though I've said that before and immediately becomes untrue on other things, so we'll see. It definitely feels different to watch just from not having grown up with or experienced it as much as any other episode. All that being said, let's move on to another big favorite lost and found episode. Season 2, Episode 2, The Haunted Showboat, originally aired September 15th, 1973. Guest starring this time is the cast of Hanna-Barbera's Archie comics adaptation, Josie and the Pussycats. This is another episode lost for a time by not being included in the best of DVD set, which is as odd as the Addams, as Warner was able to release the complete original series on DVD way back in 2007, only 2 years later. You'd think they'd be able to negotiate this episode as well during the same time period, but licensing can be weird like that, sadly. Thankfully, the 2019 Blu-ray finally restored it to us, but not without issue. Almost immediately, the episode's audio goes out of sync with the visuals, and it just becomes progressively more out of sync with every commercial break, sometimes even in the middle of a scene. It's frankly unwatchable in how bad it is, and I had to resync the audio myself just to be able to watch it for this and include it in the video. They were able to make sure it was the full uncut episode, unlike Cher and Sandy Duncan's episodes, but somehow couldn't keep the audio in sync? So, who are Josie and the Pussycats?
Josie and the Pussycats!
The characters first appeared in Archie comics starting in 1963 under the name She's Josie, following a fictional band trio. Yes, that's Pepper, not Valerie in the original trio. The comic would undergo many changes from the title to characters, including introducing the character Alan M as Josie's boyfriend in 1969. This period also saw Sebastian, the cat of band manager Alexander's twin sister Alexandra, be revealed to be a reincarnation of an ancestor executed for being involved with witchcraft, and Alexandra could cast spells when holding him, allowing her to compete for Alan against Josie. Hanna-Barbera would not ultimately include this lore in the TV show, and the comics subsequently forgot about it. That period would also see a new bass player take over in Valerie, replacing Pepper, who became part of the trio instead by the time of 1970, as part of figuring out how to adapt the series for TV. You see, when Hanna-Barbera's TV series debuted on my birthday, September 12th, in 1970, Valerie's singing voice, Patrice Holloway, would be the one to sing the theme song of the show and lead the fictional band in reality, rather than Josie. Music producer Danny Jansen wasn't aware that all of the trio was meant to be white, and had chosen her, and it was too late and he hadn't the heart to tell Patrice she was out. This did actually give Hanna-Barbera pause, not wanting to use Patrice because of her race specifically, but Jansen, who'd had the group deliver a Motown feel, still refused to budge. Hanna-Barbera would have to go back and forth with Archie Comics about figuring out what to do about it, and so Valerie came to be as a solution, introduced first in the comics to get audiences to know her, and then the show. Valerie being here at all was a big deal, as while she wasn't the first black character in a Saturday morning cartoon, she was still one of the first. Hanna-Barbera had specifically contacted Archie Comics about wanting to make a show after Filmation's The Archie Show was such a hit in 1968, a series that itself would partially inspire them to create a certain dog detective as well in 1969. They were eventually able to work out all the kinks, of course, leading to the 16 episodes produced in that first season. The collaboration did, however, see the dynamics be reworked into being more of a Scooby-Doo replica, rather than being like the Josie comics prior. In it, you have Josie, leader of the Pussycats, voiced by Janet Waldo, as previously mentioned.
It looks like we're going to spend most of the trip washing and drying dishes.
Leading her band with Melody and Valerie.
What do you want to do, Alexandra? Wash or dry?
Now I'll have to dry the dishes all over again.
Then you have love interest Ellen, of course.
This is the life. It's so relaxing.
Their manager, Alexander, is voiced by Casey Kasem, who obviously voices Shaggy, which makes for some interesting situations in our crossover.
Well, gang, we're on our way to our big gig at Pago Pago Island. How do you like it?
And lastly, you have Alexandra, his twin, as our antagonist trying to steal Alan.
I'd like to throw you over the side for getting us stuck in this old rust bucket, brother dear.
Along with her cat Sebastian, who shares a sort of voice with Scooby as well in Don Messick. A sequel with 16 more episodes would actually premiere in September of 1972, Josie and the Pussycats in Outer Space. It's exactly what it sounds like.
Josie in outer space. Pussycats are all in place. On another chase. Our stars Milky Way when they're moving
this time the show was eventually canceled by CBS. A year later, this crossover with Scooby-Doo aired, and that's how we got to where we are today. Let's get into it. First, this episode, as we've covered, is titled The Haunted Showboat, and there's actually a Nancy Drew book published 16 years prior with the exact same name and a similar plot, the showboat even being on the cover art, which understandably looks a lot like the one in the episode. Coincidence? Who can say?
Josie and the gang join us today.
It's kind of interesting to note here that Shaggy and Scooby are always on the guest intro card ahead of their shadows, so it's unusual that they are absent, perhaps by accident, on this one. The light from Shaggy's flashlight is even still positioned to be coming from him, but instead comes from nothing. Anyway, the gang are driving around what Daphne refers to as Mark Twain country, and they treat his books, like Tom Sawyer, who she also references, as if they're real historical events that happened rather than fiction. This episode is for some reason based on that. They're on their way to the Tom Sawyer Festival in particular, in fact, and this might have some of the buggiest off-model animation of the show, actually. Scooby in this entire scene is barely even recognizable. The person who drew this seems to have not seen his character design model sheet beforehand, respectfully, and it's beautiful. While confused and lost, they hear a moaning sound that seems to be nearby. It seems their fate has been decided when the van gets stuck, placing them right in front of the creepy titular showboat. They still hear the weird moaning, but with a storm heading this way, they decide the showboat is their best cover for now. But on their way up, they hear a cackle, and then spot some shadows running up top of the showboat, which turns out to be the Pussycat gang.
I thought this was a gangway, not a freeway.
Oh, wow! Hey, your group really floors me!
So I noticed.
They introduce themselves, Alexander having booked them for a gig on this boat not knowing what it actually looked like, getting them into a mess as always. The captain with his first mate appear to try and dissuade them from believing it's haunted at least, and pathological people-pleaser Josie wants to stick around to help them revive the showboat, so Fred offers the gang's assistance. There's a storm to hide from anyway.
Me three.
Also, this is absolutely not Alexander's voice coming from him. This is a woman. They even repeat the girlish scream twice, like, what is going on here? The captain shows them their rooms, and Josie explains what evidence of haunting they've seen, like objects moving around, not helped by Sebastian mischievously faking this to scare Scooby. Just as it seems clear, they hear chains rattling, and the captain references...
It's Injun Joe!
Yes, that character from Mark Twain's fictional novel, who we will refer to more simply as Joe for reasons. Somehow, despite not being a real person, he is apparently haunting the showboat. In Twain's novel, Joe is a half-indigenous man portrayed as violent and vengeful, presenting indigenous people in the savage stereotype. Being published in 1876, it's safe to say this portrayal, normal for the time, is now outdated and racist, and even his name is derogatory, a slur in fact. In 1973, it was still pretty normal though, especially in Scooby-Doo's world of Americana. It's not acceptable to call Joe that first part, so we will refrain, but the episode says it about 100 more times to make sure you know he's the Tom Sawyer character. Anyway, the gang find the chains and name drop Awfully Strange. They give exposition about who Joe was, but they say it happened 100 years ago. Again, as if Tom Sawyer was a real story. And I guess so, because here's his ghost. And he's not alone. The ghost of Captain Scavenger is here too, looking identical to Captain Moody from one of Don Knotts' episodes. With the boys and Sebastian going overboard, he vanishes somehow despite likely being a real living man in disguise, and Joe gives them a warning to leave. The boys meanwhile are safe, having landed on land. Josie lies to the captain and first mate meanwhile about what they saw, not wanting to worry him as they tell him goodnight.
We'll lock ourselves in our staterooms and post a watch.
Gee, why would you want to mail a watch? He means stand guard, Melody.
This is actually so funny, like, why is Velma so pissed at Melody? Anyway, she volunteers the boys for first guard duty as everyone else heads to bed, and both ghosts creep out, confronting them into fainting, and somehow walking into a wall again. Everyone gets woken up by the snores and looks out to find sleeping gas, and Alexandra isn't wrong that real ghosts wouldn't need a gimmick like that. Waking up the boys, they follow the captain who explains the ghost opened their vault and stole all their savings in the night, while only he and the first mate know the combination. Not only will they have to shutter the showboat, the captain also found a warning letter that reveals his first mate has been spirited away. Joe is keeping watch to make sure it's working when they hear a voice call out, Lance Goodwin, pretty obviously sharing a voice with Fred's actor Frank Welker but with a southern drawl, insists he is going to buy the showboat to turn it into a casino. Suspicious. He even references that the first mate is missing and maniacally laughs as he leaves. That's just even more weird if it's not him, which the gang picks up on. They decide to move forward with their plans to give the boat a makeover, and Sebastian takes his chance to scare the chickens again, not realizing they ran into Joe. While Josie and Alan paint together, Alexandra schemes to steal Alan away per usual, planning to have Sebastian dump Josie off, but a ghost switches the rope, seeing to it that Alexandra falls instead. Valerie elsewhere is trying to help Fred and Daff, but Joe tosses one of his chains into the cogs.
Any ideas, Valerie? According to my expertise in marine engines, something's on the fritz.
They find and remove the chain, but Joe then switches labels on the machinery, soaking them instead. Captain Scavenger elsewhere turns the water hose on full force for the boys, spraying right into Alexander's face, who immediately is paranoid they're sinking. Joe turns the fan on, ruining his safe refuge, so it's up to Melody to save them. Last thing you ever want to say. But just as the others fix the machinery, the safe landing of the boys turns into danger for a minute. After a while, they have the boat looking nice and fresh, while someone's driving toward them, turning out to be Lance again. Come to say he bought the mortgage papers and the boat will be his in 3 days when the captain can't pay. All of them angrily insist their benefit will save it, regardless of ghosts. Thelma finally wonders if Lance might be one of the supposed ghosts, and if the first mate isn't missing and just working with them. That night, excited to tell the captain, their ghost traps go off, and it turns out it's the captain instead who they caught. They catch him up on everything and ask if he thinks the first mate could be involved, but he gets so upset he tells them to leave if they think so. With that, he storms off angrily, intent on finding the sheriff to help find him instead.
Oh, gone already? You really have a healthy appetite, Melody.
I love how incredibly bouncy he is here. Suddenly they hear the laughing and the spooky scavenger warns them, but Fred thinks they have numbers on him. However, he somehow manages to vanish into thin air again. Thelma pulls them all together with a plan, Josie shouting that they're leaving and then everyone hiding. But as the ghosts come out to check, they can hear through the speaker tube that it's a lie. Alexandra suggests they leave, Alan coming with her, but Josie says she wouldn't abandon the captain for $1 million, which, speaking of, Melody has found plenty of. The ghosts aren't happy about being found out, and the gang walked right into a trap themselves. They're dropped down so that the ghost can do away with them, but Josie starts leaving a trail of money and the boys got left behind, which means they're their only hope. Up top, they find Lance lurking around, so they distract him and hop in a lifeboat. They hear a noise and recognize it's probably the others, and spot the money as an obvious trail to follow. Just as Josie's about to run out of cash, the rocks open up and they drive through.
They didn't even say Open Sesame Street.
The ghosts pick them up and drop them down, while the boys continue following the trail. Joe's spirit, meanwhile, is noticeably transparent, Thelma figuring it must mean he's real. As Scooby pulls on some money with wire attached, it triggers open the secret doors, and the boys catch sight of Joe as they trip into a cart, ride past him, trip another wire, and suddenly Joe's gone. A bunch of film on a projector stopping, hence Joe disappearing. As they also notice a ton of money, they hear the echoey voices of the others call out, fearing they're ghosts, but finally find them just as the laughing of the ghosts starts again. The boys quickly get the others out as the spirits rush at them, so they split up between the gangs, keeping both in separate chases, until everyone reconvenes and finds a way out.
You think we lost him? My woman's intuition tells me definitely yes.
It's them!
The next time your woman's intuition tells you something, don't listen.
They separate the logs, everyone hopping onto one, as Fred tosses a rope over onto the boat the ghosts are in, catching a ride along back. They bump into them, run off and hide, and the boys choosing the flower scares Captain Scavenger, now having seen a real ghost. He's so spooked he runs right over Joe and the two fall overboard into water, the boys sneezing off all the flour.
Looks like you lost your flower power.
The water's washed up the spooks as well, Lance having arrived and changed his tune, dropping the accent and revealing he's a US Treasury agent. Captain Scavenger is actually the captain, who is in reality a famous counterfeiter. Shockingly, Joe is not the first mate. That dude is innocent and was locked up when he caught onto the scheme and couldn't be scared off. Now freed by Josie and the others. Who is Joe? Who knows? We don't find out. The counterfeiters use the secret cave in Tom Sawyer's cavern to print money, because again, Tom Sawyer was a real story apparently. The Showboat was their distribution point, and the ghosts were to scare everyone off. The Showboat is saved after all, and they perform their benefit. Alexandra ready to ruin Josie's day and win over Alan again. No success per usual. The former first mate has now taken over while everyone helps out, and Scooby runs off with Shaggy's reward for helping.
Doggone.
Uh-oh. Where's it going?
And that's when Scooby-Doo met Josie and the Pussycats in the haunted Showboat. Sadly, Josie and the band didn't actually get to perform any of their songs here, but maybe it's for the best if it could have added even further potential rights issues. As far as episodes doing a great service to their guest star, this one is definitely up there. Sometimes the guests can fade into the background, but Josie and her gang get a pretty good amount of equal time here. Maybe it's because they are just so great themselves. Maybe it's the fact that their dynamic is basically inspired by Scooby-Doo already. I grew up having the complete series DVD of the original 16 episodes, and I really would have loved getting to grow up with this one as well. It's a shame it was not available for a while outside of TV airings. It's also a shame that the Blu-ray messed up the audio and made it so unwatchable, but, you know. Personally, Alexandra was always my favorite character. I love a good villain. I enjoyed that she got a lot of good moments and lines in the episode. Melody, per usual, also is a lot of fun. She's typically my second favorite. Janet Waldo is also as charming as ever. She was the perfect pick for Josie undeniably, even though she wasn't going to be the initial choice. Obviously, I also grew up with the iconic 2001 live-action film. Had to shout it out here. Beyond the guest stars in particular, this is a fairly standard episode of Scooby, even reusing one of the villain's designs in a kind of lazy way. Nothing especially would have stood out here in this episode were it not for Josie. Joe and the various Mark Twain references also are odd to think about, similar to the Hyde episode of the original series that insinuates Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was also a real event in the Dooniverse. To a kid, you really probably wouldn't think too much about it, but as an adult, it's kind of weird and confusing to think about too much. And obviously, it's a little more uncomfortable with how much they say Joe's name and his general presence, considering his character in the book. I don't know that the Twain references were ultimately necessary or even interesting, but I suppose they do give the episode more of an identity beyond Josie. You can tell this episode needed a lot of new animation instead of getting to rely on reusing a lot, with how incredibly off-model this particular one is, often to bonkers levels, although sometimes you get oddly fluid animation like with Shaggy's bounciness, similar to the continuity issues with the Addams episode. You have to wonder what happened with one of the girls' voices coming out of Alexander and things like that over here as well. I feel like the episode also just kind of forgets things, like they don't outright explain the projector is why Joe was transparent. He was just a projection and not a ghost in that moment, so the real one could be off doing something else. So I guess you could argue they were assuming we are smart enough to know that, but they also don't explain who Joe even is. He's just a guy that works with the counterfeiter. Lance being undercover is a decent twist, but it also feels pretty similar to the same twist from the Cher episode in the first season. Overall, this is a good episode, a must-watch in the series, but it's really down to the guest star on this one, not the episode's individuality. I think that about does it, so let's go ahead and get to our third guest today. Season 2, Episode 6, The Weird Winds of Winona, originally aired October 13th, 1973. Guest starring in this episode is the cast of Hanna-Barbera's sort of Scooby knockoff, Speed Buggy.
Speed Buggy!
This is the only episode in this video that has never been part of the Lost group, as obviously Hanna-Barbera owned full rights to their own original characters, while all the other crossovers today are licensed adaptations of some kind. As for Speed Buggy, the show itself was brand new, the 16-episode series only premiering 1 month earlier on September 8th, 1973. Somewhat inspired by Disney's 1968 film The Love Bug and the anime series Speed Racer, several episode storylines also ironically were first written for the Josie and the Pussycats show, later reworked for this. The show followed Speed Buggy, a sentient talking car.
Hang on, everybody.
Mark, the smart guy.
Don't worry, Aunt Belle. That little pint-sized bucket of bolts is all heart.
Debbie, the pretty leader of the group.
Only 100 miles? Oh, good. That gives us plenty of time. Turn left here, Tinker.
And Tinker, the southern mechanic, and Speed Buggy's best friend and driver.
Careful, Speed Buggy! That doggone doggy's a mean one!
These speed bugs, of course, typically end up in a Villain of the Week scenario on their travels to races. Despite only having a short run, it still found popularity in reruns, often replacing shows that got cancelled, and was fairly well received, just as much as people found it to be just another Scooby or Josie, the success of which were why it was created. Speed Buggy basically just replaced the music of Josie with racing. Given that the show was new that year, crossover promotion just makes sense with Scooby here. It wouldn't be the last time though, as Scooby's boost would last. Speed Buggy would continue to appear or cameo in shows like The Laugh Olympics, Johnny Bravo, and even featured in the Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated episode Mystery Solvers Club State Finals. He also appeared as a cameo in the Funky Phantom crossover of Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, and the series Jellystone, and even various comics. With that out of the way, let's get into this atmospheric mystery.
Today we meet the famous Speed Buggy.
The gang are on the road to Winona, expecting to see a race featuring Speed Buggy for the first time, so they're already familiar with who he is, at least as a competitor. Speaking of, he and his crew are also heading there. The gang see the sign showing Winona's population and are surprised at how deserted it is, finding the hotel and most other locations to be closed down. And with nowhere to sleep, they work out an arrangement sleeping in and around the van outside. But as some weird winds pick up in Winona, it's hard for anyone to sleep. The next day, everyone's waking up in broad daylight, and suddenly we transition back to nighttime backgrounds for some reason. Nobody, of course, could sleep a wink. And I guess it's daytime again. Driving off, they just barely seem to miss Speed Buggy, and then teleport out of the van, standing out front now. Surprisingly, the Speed Bugs also recognize the gang, so I guess we're to assume their mystery skills are famous?
Go on, Scoob, it's only a car.
That talks?
That's a strange question from a dog that talks.
Terrified Scoob gets a ride around in the Bug, and Mark, who oddly has a darker skin tone than in his parent series, asks why they were in a rush, so they explain the weirdness last night. Heading the same way, they all decide to continue together, when the gang suddenly spot a weird truck in the road, too late to avoid crashing right into it unfortunately. A normal-looking old man, Clem Duncan, exits the truck and they're disappointed the damage means staying here another night, especially when the last mechanic left 2 weeks ago. Debbie points out if they need a mechanic though, they have Tinker right here, though it'll still take a couple of days and mean missing the race possibly. Mr. Duncan offers a place to work on it, and notes how strange it's been since those midnight winds started 2 months ago. An ominous shadow watching and laughing. Mr. Duncan offers the girls a room inside, and the guys get the short end with staying out here with the wind. Debbie and the girls take Speed Buggy out to find food, and Daphne isn't thrilled Velma and Debbie are set on solving this thing. The shadow watching. Of course, everything being shut down, they end up relying on food from Mr. Duncan. Debbie and Velma propose their idea to figure out the source of the winds, so they all agree to meet at midnight. We then cut from the barn in daylight to them at the barn nighttime because we can't seem to make up our minds on what time it is visually, and the winds start right at midnight as always. With the church bell going off, they ponder going through the cemetery to see who's ringing it, and they don't like what they find. The bell seemingly ringing itself, too heavy for the wind to be doing it. The shadowy figure sends a paper attack, scaring them off, and perusing town, they see another figure in an empty building. Deciding to split up, the hooded figure is creepy behind a bunch of mannequins, and I don't blame Shaggy for being spooked by them. Back at the barn the next morning, Mark and Fred are sleeping together and I said, oh, I'm sure. Everyone's woken up by Tinker continuing his work, just in time for breakfast, poor Speed Buggy having to stick to oil, and Debbie convinces him and the others to let them take him to town again, also taking the boys with them this time. Exploring more, they find the bank at least is still open and go inside, and bank president PJ Peabody also seems clueless. They hear a weird noise in the vault, and wind is suddenly flowing around in there, most unusual in the day. Mr. Peabody recommends they leave Winona too while they can, and they head back out, coming upon the Hall of Records. Looking for comics, the boys get locked up by the hooded figure, and the girls come up empty-handed, realizing they're missing the guys. Debbie has the other two stay behind while she returns for help, just in time for Tinker to finish fixing the van. Both vehicles speed back and the boys start pounding on the wall as everyone gets together. They realize it's a hidden door and answer the knocking, so the boys scream for help, and Speed Buggy unlocks the door, freeing them. Scooby is stuck in something meanwhile, a map of the whole area, and they realize it might be helpful, spotting a cave system that might be where the wind comes from. They work together to start heading toward the area, safely making it to the caves thanks to Speed Buggy. The hooded figure starts following, adding to some shadows they make on the walls and scaring off the boys, who ended up alone with an equally lost Speed Buggy. Meanwhile, two hooded figures turn the wind on, starting to blow everyone around, flying into a quiet room that the figure locks them in. Debbie gives Speedy her usual pep talk and he makes them an exit, but they also come upon a wind machine that answers the question of how they make the wind. Walking through their exit, they accidentally walk right up to several hooded figures, so a chase ensues, separating everyone as they all run in circles. Speedy and Velma catch one, pick up the boys, and then somehow Velma has separated again back with Daphne. The boys now without Velma still have a figure on their trail, but manage to trap him as well, and Fred and Mark trap the last one. The wind machine eats right through the cave, so Mark jumps in and starts driving it, leading it off a cliff and into the water as the sheriff and Mr. Duncan watch. The culprits behind the wind are also conveniently all tied up and ready to be presented. On the table the boys hid in, they find a map that has added a whole new area over the town, revealing these guys were trying to scare everyone off and buy up the properties for cheap so they could build this. The back reveals the culprit to be none other than PJ Peabody, bank president, who unmasked himself and runs off. Leave it to Speedy though, who easily catches and returns him. Everyone thanks Mr. Duncan, needing to get out of here so they can try and still make it to the race, while Scooby meanwhile teaches Speedy some new tricks. And that's the first time Scooby-Doo met Speed Buggy and the Speed Bugs in the weird winds of Winona. This episode might be a little weaker than the previous two, I think, but the cast of guest characters once again carries it like with Josie. Mark doesn't have much to do, but Debbie's plenty charming, and Tinker gets across memorably enough. Speed Buggy definitely makes his mark though. I feel like a lot of people know him just because of this episode alone and how memorable he is. The hooded figures are kind of generic, so the villains aren't all that interesting compared to some of the really iconic ones the franchise has, but the winds I think make up for that, giving it some really good spooky atmosphere. There's something about dark nights full of wind like that really have a creepy factor. Winona is in the title after all. Sometimes it's more about the vibes of the location than the actual villain. The animation when they need a lot of new shots for them sleeping or riding around in Speedy are per usual quite off model, which adds to the fun of the episode personally. I think it's kind of funny that I guess they maybe didn't prepare enough backgrounds and they had to keep switching between night and day within the same scene, which is really distracting once you notice it. I never watched Speed Buggy personally outside of this episode and similar guest appearances like Mystery Incorporated, but I I definitely did remember him because of this, and would probably check out the show given the opportunity. And I feel like that was the purpose of this episode back then, really, to get people to check out the show and watch it, with it having only premiered a month before. It has some fun moments, and I don't think I would rate it among the best of the show's 24 episodes, but this is definitely not one to skip. I always enjoyed watching it growing up, and even still, I really don't have much else to say about Speedy or this episode though, so why don't we move on to our last guest of the day. Season 2, Episode 3, Mystery in Persia, originally aired September 22nd, 1973. Guest starring in this episode is the cast of Hanna-Barbera's Jeannie.
Jeannie!
Yes, master?
Jeannie, which ran for one season of 16 episodes, actually only premiered 2 weeks before this guest appearance. So like Speed Buggy, it was a brand new series they were basically cross-promoting. Unlike the other shows, however, and more like the Forgotten Globetrotters show, this is one you're less likely to know. Produced in association with Screen Gems, similar to the Addams Family, this is a spin-off or adaptation of the 1967 TV sitcom I Dream of Jeannie. I grew up with the complete series DVD set of that show, so I watched every episode countless times personally. It followed Tony Nelson, who unknowingly frees a genie from a bottle, which turns out to be a beautiful woman genie who falls in love with him. That's a little too aimed at adults, I guess. So for the Hanna-Barbera show, we strip down all of that and get rid of Tony. Instead, Jeannie is rescued from a Californian beach by teenager Corey Anders, voiced by none other than Mark Hamill in his first voice acting job, long before his other Scooby appearances or Batman's Joker. And he also sings the theme song.
Hot dogging it up, riding high on a curl. Not thinking about I'd be meeting a girl. Then wham, I land, but that ball wasn't all. In a bottle was a chick, only 2 inches tall. Out came Jeannie, wow, and Junior Jeannie, Babu.
He's joined by best friend Henry Glop, voiced by Bob Hastings.
You ought to try my new diet. Look what it did for me.
Hey, that's not bad, Henry.
And she's joined by Babu, an annoying, stupid, awful genie in training. He's voiced by Joe Besser, who at one point was a member of the Three Stooges from 1957 to 1959, making him the only real Stooge to be in Scooby, despite the Stooges guest starring in 2 episodes of this. We'll get to that a later day.
I've been practicing levitation. Yapple dapple!
Though as different as the show is, Jeannie still typically treats Corey here as her boyfriend, similar to Jeannie and Tony in the original show. She also activates her power by shaking her hair rather than blinking. Expectedly, Barbara Eden did not reprise her role, Julie McWhorter taking over instead.
And I have even discovered what is an Olympic.
Jeannie, I think you better do that disappearing thing.
She voiced Casper the Friendly Ghost in a lot of Hanna-Barbera shows in the 70s, among many other roles for them. She's even Betty Rubble in the Jetsons Meet the Flintstones movie. The reason you might be less likely to know this show, or the Scooby crossover, is due to the fact that it specifically is an adaptation or spin-off of I Dream of Jeannie. Sony, owning Screen Gems, owns the entire franchise, including this show, rather than Warner like most of the Hanna-Barbera catalog. Thus, the Jeannie series has never been released on home video, and Warner wasn't able to include the Scooby episode in the Best Of DVD, so it became one of the lost episodes, until finally being put back through the 2019 Blu-ray. Sony at the very least has sometimes made the Jeannie series available for streaming, which is the very least they can do. While familiar with the parent series, I'm not at all familiar with the Jeannie series, so this Scooby episode is really my only taste of it before this video myself. That's really just because of the lack of availability it tends to have, because it seems like something I'd probably watch if I at least had it in front of me and dedicated the time. What I can say is that, to me, this might be the worst episode of the new Scooby-Doo movies, so this should be interesting to look at. Let's go ahead and get into Scooby's first adventure outside America.
Jeannie joins us for some fun and magic.
Did we really need to show Babu? Per usual, the gang are out on the road when they catch sight of an interesting bike with 2 dudes on it, and for some reason they're looking the opposite direction when it cuts back to them. Somehow they seem to recognize them the more they look, Corey and Henry, and it snaps into place for Scooby when he sees none other than Jeannie flying by, which he tries to communicate by imitating her hair with his tail, but the shock of seeing her causes the gang to crash. You're doing that a lot in this video. Now, how do they know Jeannie? Are Jeannie and the guys famous? That seems like it wouldn't be desirable based on original series canon. Do they watch the Jeannie show? It only premiered 2 weeks before this. That's not a lot of time to get to know them. And does that mean the show is reality TV like the Addams Family episode? I have questions the show is not ready to answer. Jeannie takes the blame, but Shag and Scoob are so in love that they blame Fred for being a rotten driver of an old truck. Daphne needs to sue her plastic surgeon. Corey offers to help get the van out, but Jeannie makes up for her part by whipping it out herself. The boys finally bring up food, and the others agree it is about time to eat, so Corey gives the okay and Jeannie produces some lunch. As the boys prepare to chow down though, their sandwiches vanish, and Jeannie calls out nasty, nasty Babu. As they say goodbye, Scooby melts over Jeannie, and Fred offers that they hang out with the gang a bit, and Jeannie convinces Corey.
You have been an apprentice genie for 1,500 years. When will you learn?
I slipped!
On the road, Jeannie asks Scooby if he wants to ride out with her, and wiggles him over into the air. Babu offers to do the same to a reluctant Shaggy, but of course he's nasty and incompetent, and the gang end up floating up in the sky. Thankfully, Jeannie puts it right, and they come to a fork in the road, when Babu gets a message from the Great Haji that they're being requested to Persia to help his friend.
Persia?
Where's Persia?
They call it Iran now.
There's a prince called Aben who's a great. How many greats is that?
The gang are disappointed their trip has been cut short, but Corey asks why they can't all just go, and Jeannie thinks that's a brilliant idea. Unbeknownst to them, an evil djinn who wants revenge against the Great Haji is being unleashed by the prince's uncle. Jeannie poofs them away, and they indeed find themselves in Persia. With it being so dark, the two chickens want to leave, but Jeannie easily guilts Scoob into staying for her. Something opens the palace gates though, so the boys run off and Jeannie poofs them back around. Shaggy also has sleeves in the pool for some reason that are immediately gone. While someone is definitely up there watching, the gang can't seem to find any proof of life inside themselves, so Jeannie suggests they sleep here for the night. Babu rooms with the boys because, of course. The person watching meanwhile is discovered in the closet, so Babu calls for Jeannie, who becomes wholly protective and whips into action, seeming to defeat whatever this was, but confirming the danger it possessed.
How come you comb your hair before you go to bed?
Like in case I meet some chick in a dream.
Some chick, oh I'm sure. Something's up with his reflection, so he runs and jumps into bed with his boyfriend for protection. Jeannie pops in to check on them, but Henry can't replicate what he saw. Trouble is brewing though. This bird popping in on Fred, who comfortably has his own room to himself for some reason. Likewise, a shadow creeps up and drops the girls into a hole under the bed, Fred following suit in his own room. Corey tries to comfort his beloved, but they get dropped down as well, the boys right behind them. Jeannie realizes she can't find anyone and has to wake Babu up. The others are all dumped together, and testing the doors one by one doesn't go well after a couple of tries. Jeannie uses her master GPS and locates them, whipping one of the doors open, the boys falling down to them, followed by the rest. The uncle greets them from atop the pyramid, and they meet with the prince, Aben, finally, who seems pretty chill, aside from thinking he won't be a prince for long. It is custom a prince has to live here in the palace for 1 year without ever leaving to become sultan, but strange things have been occurring. Also, Don Messick, aka Scooby, is credited for voicing him, but this guy sounds very different and incredibly youthful. I kind of feel like this is not true. I'm usually really good about that kind of thing. Anyway, they get a freaky, hair-raising spook as they experience what he was talking about. The prince reveals there's a legend his ancestors sealed an evil djinn in a bottle in the walls, but this means he's out. So the uncle, his grand vizier, says the prince needs to leave. Meanwhile, the boys and Henry run off, followed by Babu, and the evil djinn materializes. As much as the uncle pressures, even Daphne agreeing, Aben refuses to leave his people, even as everyone else has now left. Fred and the others volunteer to stay with him though, and Corey points out Jeannie's capableness. It's interesting that, with a Jeannie in training to look after, she is the responsible and competent character instead of the one getting everybody into shenanigans, like in the Parent sitcom. The djinn elsewhere in the palace continues his search for the others, while they do their best to hide. Prince Aben helps everyone look for their missing members, not sure why anyone would be out to get him, beyond perhaps revenge. Scooby and company find what they think is food, but does in fact turn out to be laundry, everyone else finding them predictably here in the kitchen. The evil djinn appears and Jeannie tries to stop him, but he freezes her in place, threatening to imprison her for 10,000 years like he was. The noise of the others is cancelled out by freezing them as well, sucking Jeannie into the bottle where she's helpless. And I know it's shocking, but geez, like everyone here looks crazy. I hope they're okay. The djinn warns the prince is next if he doesn't leave, and exits with Jeannie in hand. Aben decides maybe he should leave, and even the gang all have mixed opinions.
Could I be less brave than a female?
I could.
Scooby getting some extra bribery, they start searching the palace to find their stolen friend. But they fall for the easy trick, half watching this spot to go down, the others watching it to go up, splitting them apart. Taking in this room Aubyn's never seen before, Henry looks out the window thinking it's a picture, falls out, and then everyone else follows suit. They land in the Djinn's cave, and Velma finds an interesting bottle which Aubyn says she can keep if they get out. The Stooges look around as well, getting spooked by a voice, until they realize it's the voice of Jeannie. Unfortunately, there's an invisible barrier that can only be broken by sound, so Scooby mournfully howls, which conveniently is enough to break it, and Jeannie brings herself back to normal, giving him a very appreciated kiss. She uses her master GPS and finds them, whipping a hole in the wall, and they all appreciate Scooby for his work when Jeannie notices Velma's 10,000-year-old bottle. The Djinn appears again, but Jeannie has a plan and is on top of his tricks now, saying the Great Haji, master of all genies, sent her for a reason, increasing her attacks until he's forced into the bottle. While Aubyn is relieved, the others point out that if the Djinn was imprisoned for 10,000 years, someone had to let him out, and would have been controlling him. By now, they of course know who it is, and Jeannie brings out the culprit. His uncle felt that he deserved the throne, and that he didn't like how his brother, Aubyn's father, ruled with love. Aubyn isn't sure what to do with his uncle still being blood, so Velma suggests the Great Haji might have a good opinion. Jeannie agrees and traps the uncle with his djinn, sending them off. What seems like another fright turns out to be the best thing possible, food ready to eat. And this shot is not only crazy because Daphne's green hairband is black, but Henry's voice comes out of Fred.
Don't you guys ever learn?
Thankfully, this time it's not laundry, it's just soap. And that's when Scooby-Doo met Jeannie in Mystery in Persia. Definitely an interesting episode, and probably still my least favorite of this 24-episode series. It's certainly not much of a Scooby episode. There isn't really a mystery for the audience at least, because they immediately tell us it's the uncle behind all of this from the jump. I really think it would have been better if they had not revealed at least that it was him, so that we could still think maybe he's innocent while he's with his nephew. It still would have been pretty obvious, but it wouldn't have been literally told to us already. Prince Aubyn, who I'm really convinced is not voiced by Don Messick, is a pretty nice guy, but he is a bit boring. There isn't too much to his character beyond that he is just nice. So both the villain and the victim here are a little bit uninteresting. This has to probably be the most disappointing episode of the show when it comes to that. There's frankly nothing to hook you. Not to mention this episode is interesting in being the first time Scooby ever does actually have something supernatural occurring, way before the 80s movies or any of the other shenanigans. Although you could kind of argue the same with the Addams family, but this one is just so much more blatant. And likewise, it's kind of weird that they don't explain how the gang recognized these guest stars. I feel like they could have just as easily not done that and still get thrown off by seeing a woman floating, but I guess that's how they have the gang digest that there's a supernatural woman and believe it at all. Babu is the absolute worst, and one of the things that does actually keep me from checking out the main show. This episode would have sold me if not for him, so I can't personally speak to how well it does as cross-promotion. Corey and Henry are pretty likable though, although kind of generic themselves. Being Mark Hamill's first voice acting role is about the most interesting thing here. You can tell the cast of 4 is really leaning on the 2 genies to carry the interest. Jeannie herself is very charming though. The voice actress does a pretty decent Barbara Eden kind of performance, but I do think it's a weird choice to make her the responsible adult basically. I also think traveling to Persia isn't quite clear on what's going on. I feel like we get lost in some stereotypes enough to feel like we aren't in the same year we were just in and maybe time traveled or something, which maybe we did, maybe we didn't, I don't know. The episode honestly really isn't as bad as I remember, but it's definitely not one I would put on directly by choice outside of doing a full rewatch of the whole show. It's just really not a Scooby-Doo episode. It's not quite what I'm looking for. It's one of those things where you just feel like this was maybe a studio mandate and not because somebody was passionate and really wanted Scooby to cross over with this cast at the time. It's still a fun novelty though, and I guess we'll leave it at that, which means our business here is done. And with all that being said, those are the last 4 remaining Scooby-Doo and Hanna-Barbera crossover episodes. I thought this would be interesting, but this has turned into probably one of my favorite videos I've done personally, so I do hope you've enjoyed at least a moment or two of walking down this particular path of the new Scooby-Doo movies. There are a lot of iconic moments on display here in these episodes, which is really to be expected with such interesting IPs like the Addams family or Josie. Those 2 in particular just seem like they are perfectly suited to go together with Scooby, at least once, making them some of the biggest must-see episodes of this show. Speed Buggy's appearance, as the only one I actually got to fully grow up with, is also still a pretty memorable episode that I have a lot of nostalgic fondness for. It's interesting to talk about this as my favorite classic era series, because 3 of these 4 episodes really aren't ones that I grew up with, so they don't necessarily play a role in why I love this series so much. But they do show why there's so much to love about these episodes even when you're an adult, and maybe learning to love them with the rest of the episodes now instead. Warts and all. We still have more episodes of this show to get through though, so look forward to more episodes covering the rest of the iconic guest stars paired up. There are some real gems, both ones that exemplify why this was my my favorite show as a kid, and more of why I'm growing to love the episodes no longer lost to us outside reruns. People treat this show like a joke, like one of the worst things to happen to the franchise even at times, so I'm standing here to put some respect on its name, and still have some fun with it. Anyway, I think this video is long enough. That's what happens when you're covering 4 episodes that run over 40 minutes long each. I won't make it any harder on myself to edit or for you to watch. I'll see you in the next video with a new batch of guests. Bye!